Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I hope you are well. My name is Jimmy, aka Perceptes. Welcome to Patch and Play. Is this going to be the last August stream? I think it might be. I have to check the calendar. This is a live stream that I do almost every week usually on Mondays at this time, but occasionally on weekends. And it's a stream where we spend an hour or two together exploring some fun sound design and music making on my modular synthesizer, which is what you see in front of you. If you're new to all this and you have no idea what you're looking at, this is a musical instrument. Modular synthesis is a way of making electronic music where you construct your own custom instrument by buying these little boxes called modules that perform one single function that's part of a larger function of an electronic instrument, and you buy them based on what you want to achieve with your particular setup. And they have these little 3.5 millimeter audio jacks on them that transmit electricity, and you use these patch cables to plug into the jacks, and that's how the modules communicate with each other. So through a bunch of cables, you create a signal flow that creates the music that you want. So what you see here is three cases that have modules in them. I have my two big performance cases here that are kind of purpose built for the type of stuff that I like to do. And then I have my little overflow case over in the bottom right, which I change out the modules in kind of more often from week to week, based on kind of what I think I might be doing. And then over here is the Oxy 1 sequencer. This is kind of the brains of the operation that can be used to drive pitch sequences and modulation, drums, everything else. We don't always use this, but it works very well with a modular synth because it's designed for that as one of the primary applications. You can see there's this HDMI cable that's coming out of the back of the Oxy One and plugging into this little module here in the right case, and this has all of the outputs of the sequences inside the Oxy One. So I can program something on here and then patch a cable from this little module out to the other stuff to get everything going. So that's the lay of the land. Let me check to see if anyone is here. Oh, we already have some activity in the chat. Sunbursta Studios, welcome to the stream. I am doing well. I hope you are. Sunbursta says, I am super happy but poor as I've added 176 HP extension to my Eurosystem. Oh my goodness, that is quite a lot. So that's like basically a whole case. Waiting for Xeramixa to arrive. Got a silver panel version. Oh, very nice. Okay, so Xeramixa is this module I've talked about many times on the stream before. In the bottom right corner of my dark case, it's this big 8-channel mixer. There are several mixer options for mixing audio signals in your modular, and it's kind of hard to decide on one because they all have kind of pros and cons. And this is the one that I picked because it has the best feature set sort of compromise for my particular use cases. So those who have been watching the stream for a while have seen this in action many times. Probably it's a good advertisement for Xeramixa, but there's plenty of other ones. Yeah, so the company that makes this is Noise Engineering, and I have a bunch of their modules. You can see in this bottom row, like almost all of these are Noise Engineering modules. I think actually everything except for the far left one here. And they used to produce all of their modules in two different colors. There was a black color like this, like that you see here, and then also in the left case I have one of their silver modules. So this one right here, Vice Verga, that's a Noise Engineering module also with the silver panel. I think it's a little bit more gray than silver. I don't know if you can tell on the stream, but the color kind of doesn't really match the silver of these other ones. But they not too long ago announced that they're not going to be producing the silver ones anymore. Because I think when you produce hardware, that the more different variations of something you have, the more inventory there is to manage, and maybe the silver ones didn't sell as well as the black ones, and so the overhead for them wasn't worth it. So they were doing like a big sale on trying to sort of liquidate their remaining inventory of silver panels. So I'm not sure if that's completely sold out, but you can very likely get some good deals on their stuff. Yeah, Sunbursta says, didn't know about Xeramixa until seeing it on my stream. It's going, yes, After Later Audio Bartender. That's, I think, probably the most popular sort of mixing solution in Eurorack now. That's sort of like a modular mixer, which is very appropriate for modular synthesis, where rather than getting like a single module that has all this stuff crammed into it, it's like multiple modules that you can sort of chain together and build up based on your specific needs. So it has like a certain number of sort of channels that are built in, but you can get expanders that add additional channels. And so for that reason, it's very popular. Is my still remain artwork says I'm very quiet. Let me try turning up the volume. Yeah, I heard this last time too, that I was quiet. I'll try it. I don't know why it's so quiet, but how about now? Is that better? Can you hear my voice a little bit better? Yeah, I got this feedback last week that it was really quiet, which is very strange because I didn't change anything on my side. At least not that I think I did. Anyway, let me know if that's better. Okay, good. So I have to remember I need to use higher gain for the live streams now than I do for videos for some reason. I do not know what I did differently. I guess I have been changing the settings for sort of the compression because like when I start with the music, I want you to be able to hear my voice over the music. I don't want either to drown out the other one. So I've been experimenting with some compression settings, but I didn't think I had changed anything last week. So a little weird that suddenly it got all quiet. Okay, well, good that we got that out of the way. Thank you for the feedback, because I don't hear it the same way you all hear it, so it's hard for me to know when I need to adjust. So when I got Zero Mixa, I don't think that Bartender had come out yet, and I probably would have considered that. I think I've said on the stream before, the reason I picked Zero Mixa is because it's like, for me, it's the best compromise of physical size to feature set. There are other mixers that have like kind of more powerful options. Especially the main thing that I'm mixing is the ability to get direct outputs of each individual channel post fader. Zero Mixa gives you up to 3 different stereo outputs, but you don't get individual channel outputs. So if you want to record all of your individual channels into your computer for mixing later, then Zero Mixa is not very good for that purpose. But for me, that was a okay compromise because I am trying not to overproduce music that I make with modular. So I actually intentionally just want to capture a stereo mix so that I can kind of make music be kind of this more ephemeral thing that's about the process and enjoyment of playing the music and not agonizing over the details of production. But if that's something that matters to you, I would not recommend Zero Mixa. It's not good for that. And there are other mixers that take less space but don't have as many channels, and ones that are much larger that do more. And so this felt like the best compromise to me. Yes, that's another cool thing about the Zero Mixa is that it's programmable. So there's a MIDI input and output. So if you did actually want to record individual channels, there's a hacky way that you can do it. What you would do is you would have to take a copy of every single input that you send into the mixer and send the copy prior to going into the mixer into your audio interface just as a direct input, and then into the mixer. And then you also record MIDI from the MIDI out jack into your computer, and then you can actually record sort of all of the movements of the faders and the switches and every other setting. It's sending MIDI messages to the computer. So you can use that to sort of recreate the motions of your live performance after the fact, which if you really wanted to do it is that's how you would do it. But that seems very unfun to me. So it's not something I've ever tried myself. But it is a great feature. I think that was given the feature set of this and the fact that it's an analog mixer inside, so there's no way for them to sort of uncombine the mixes to give you direct outputs. I think this was the best compromise in terms of giving you the flexibility to do that if you really wanted to, so you weren't totally locked into a corner. And I'm sure there's other applications also of why you might want to have MIDI input or output. I mean, the MIDI input also allows you to control this stuff from other control surfaces. There's also this expander here. This little strip on the left is actually a separate module that connects to the mixer with an extension cable behind the panel. And this is their solution for CV programmability of all of the controls. A lot of other mixers, the reason that they're larger is because per channel they have like a CV input for panning or for volume automation or effect send levels. And so if you start to multiply that number of jacks by the number of channels, the physical panel has to grow much larger. And Noise Engineering's solution for this is, if you don't need any of that type of control, you don't pay for it at all because it's all on a separate module. So you just don't even buy this. But if you want it, this is all configurable. So these 8 are 8 generic inputs, and you program with the little menu on the Zero Mixa main module what the inputs do. So you can map the same signal coming in on any jack to any number of parameters across any number of channels. So it's kind of like a modulation matrix that I've used on the on the stream several times. I sometimes use it for like panning automation. You can use it sort of for as like essentially like a VCA. I've used it for sidechain sort of kick drum pumping. Like the technique that I usually do is if I have I have like a kick drum and a bass, and I want the volume of the bass to sort of drop away when the kick drum hits. You can just send an envelope into one of these CV channels to automate moving the volume down in time with the kick drum. So it's not actually using a compressor, but you get a similar sort of effect in the final sound, which is a very handy feature that you're able to do with the expander. Sunburst says, going to get the expander, but can't find a silver one. Yeah, that's a bummer. They did actually sell, I don't know if they still do, but they sell like replacement panels. So which was the one? Oh yeah, so Neve Grad, this one up in the top right here. That's another noise engineering module that I use for changing the signal levels between modular and line and instrument level, as modular runs at much higher voltages peak to peak than sort of traditional line level inputs, and also instrument inputs like guitar pedals. So this module allows you to convert between those levels if you want to use external instruments with your modular stuff. So I actually bought this as a silver paneled version, and it was originally in the other case. Because I tried to kind of match the colors between the two cases. And then I ended up rearranging things such that the Neve Grad ended up in the dark case. So I actually bought a replacement panel and swapped that out myself. It didn't do a great job. I think I actually scratched it a little bit, but that was my first time replacing a panel like that. So you might be able to find, or they might still sell the panels separate from the module. That's another way you could go to try to get that. Okay. Let's see, what are we going to do today? So, I forget if I said at the beginning, but so the goal of these streams is to kind of start with a blank slate. When I post a musical performance using modular, you see the finished state, and I include captions that kind of explain a little bit of the key elements of each setup, but it's kind of hard to understand like how you get to that point. So part of the motivation for these streams was to show the process, both in terms of like what I physically do with the system, and also my thought process about like how I'm making decisions about what to do, to show people kind of like how it works, at least for me. So I want the streams to be entertaining. Hopefully we'll make some sounds that are kind of fun, if not great. And I also really like teaching. So regardless of what I'm talking about at any point, please interrupt me in the live chat to ask questions, or if you want to sort of direct me towards something that you're interested in, I'm more than happy to kind of accommodate. And that's the reason for doing this live as opposed to as a pre-recorded video, so that it can be more interactive and I can help with what people need. So I don't practice anything I'm going to do on these streams in advance, but I do think about like what should kind of the kicking off point be in advance, just so I'm not sitting here twiddling my thumbs. And I try to come up with something a little bit different each time, although that's hard to do, doing this stream every week, to keep coming up with new ideas. But tomorrow I have a video coming out about like a small techno case that one of the key modules that I use in that is Mimetic Digitalis, which is this module right here. This is a CV sequencer, also from Noise Engineering. And I use this in the same way almost every time I use it, which is essentially as like 16 steps of random modulation values, kind of like a sample and hold, basically. But Mimetic Digitalis is capable of more than that. So I thought it might be kind of a good topic for a stream to try to wrangle a little bit more out of Mimetic Digitalis than what I usually use it for, like trying to use it in a slightly, maybe not in a more advanced way, but at least a different way, and just kind of explore some of its other IO or use cases. So that's one kind of kicking off point we might do today. The other thing I thought about is my Bard Quartet expander, which is this one in the bottom left corner of the light case. That's a sorry, not expander, but this is a quantizer. So you send it in voltages, and it will adjust the voltages so that they are exactly the right distance apart to create a musical scale if you send the output into the pitch input of an oscillator. So this has a lot of features too, and one of the features it has that I've never used is as a shift register, where so the idea of a shift register is like, you have a sequence of identical channels, which is the case in Bard Quartet. There's 4 identical quantizers, identical in terms of their feature set. And rather than sending in a different sequence to each one, you send in a sequence to the first one, and every time the first one changes which note it's playing, the next one to the right of it plays the note that the previous one was playing. So it's kind of like you're playing the same sequence across multiple channels, but they're offset by 1 step, each apart from each other. So like the first channel is playing, and then the second channel is playing the previous note, and the third channel is playing the notes 2 previous, and the fourth channel is playing the note 3 previous. I've never tried using that feature of the Bard Quartet, so I thought that would be interesting. I also learned that Marbles has the ability to do shift register functionality when you're processing an external voltage. So maybe we'll want to kind of combine those. I don't know. So I'm not really sure exactly where we're going to go with this, but that's like a few different ideas I had for things that I want to experiment with. One other thing that I've changed in the case since last week is I flashed a couple of different firmwares onto the noise engineering modules. So I have these 4 like platform modules from noise engineering where there's a bunch of different firmwares that do different things that run on the same hardware, and you can connect these to your computer with a USB cable and put a different module on it essentially, and then you just drop these little plastic or I guess PCB overlays on top that show you the labels of the different firmware that you flashed onto it. So I have 2 Elias, which is like an oscillator platform, and 2 Versios, which is an effects platform. I've gone back to my default stock instruments for Elias. So we've got Basimilus and Manus, which is like a drum voice and kind of an industrial synth voice. And then on my effects modules, I currently have flashed Yester Versio, which is they describe as kind of like their simple delay. Most of their delays are kind of like weird and experimental, but this one is like more straightforward. And then I have on the right one, Melotus Versio, which is a granular delay, which I've used very little, so I thought this might also be interesting to explore. Hey, Tyler Flanagan, welcome to the stream. Good to see you. Sunburst has said there's an alternative firmware for Marbles that has grids mode as well as loads of other cool additions. Yes, I believe it's called Trebuchet. Am I right? So there's already similar functionality in Marbles. We can talk about Marbles today if people are interested. But this is a module that does, it's all about sampling randomness. So it has 2 sides. On the left side, it generates random gate patterns for rhythmic stuff. And on the right side, it generates random CV values for modulation or pitch sequencing. And it has multiple like modes that the 2 sides can operate in that are what these LEDs at the top left and top right are. They're indicating which mode it's in. So if you switch the left side into the red mode, then that's actually already kind of a grids mode. Grids is, I actually have grids. Let me go into the pod. So this guy right here, this is this UGrids. This is a open source clone of Mutable Instruments Grids, which is their drum sequencer module. This is like, it's a bunch of pre-programmed drum patterns for 3 voices. So generally it's like kick, snare, and hi-hat. And it's got a whole bunch of pre-programmed drum patterns that are laid out in a grid, like a 2-dimensional grid. You can imagine like looking at a spreadsheet where each of the cells is a different pattern, and you select which pattern you're playing by controlling the x-axis and the y-axis of like which cell you're selecting on the grid. But it's not just like picking a single cell, because you can blend between adjacent cells, and then it will interpolate the 2 patterns and kind of combine them on the fly. So on Marbles, if you go into the red mode on the T side, it kind of does a similar thing where these 3 T outputs, the middle one will be kind of a constant rate, like a hi-hat. The left one will be sort of the kick drum pattern, and the right one will be the snare drum pattern. And I think changing the bias knob will change kind of what the pattern is. So it's not literally the exact same pre-programmed patterns that are in grids, because you don't have like the XY control. But it's a very similar idea of being able to sort of control pre-programmed drum patterns based on a clock of your choosing. Yeah, that's cool. Sunburst says, one feature I will definitely use is volt per octave transposing of the X outputs with CV steps. Yes, I haven't explored external processing much. So normally, or like the default kind of way of using marbles is that the right side is generating random voltages on these X outputs, and it creates a new voltage every time one of the T outputs changes. So it's based on sort of an internal clock. But you can also patch in a clock to either side, T or X. And if you press this little button in the middle, and you plug an external CV signal into this jack right here, then it will actually sample values from that external input instead of its internal random source. So you can use that for kind of remixing or modifying your own sequence on the fly. It's not something I've done yet, but very interesting. They're like essentially a whole new set of functionality for the right half of the module when you have an external voltage coming in. Okay, we've been talking a while already, so maybe we should start patching something for those that are interested in the actual music here and not just the chatter. I think I want to start with Mimetic Digitalis. One thing I was kind of interested in doing here is like maybe decoupling the pitch sequence from the trigger sequence. So why don't we sequence something with Manus? Maybe what I will do. Why don't we use Mimetic Digitalis for kind of a random sequence of pitches like I usually do? So I'm going to just turn on, let me zoom in on this. So these buttons here tell you which of the 4 channels you're selecting. There are 4 identical channels internally. And then when these lights are lit, any operation you do affects all of those channels. So if I hold the load button and the 0 button and press shred, then it will select for each of the 16 steps in its internal sequencer a randomly selected voltage, and holding that combination of buttons will limit the range of the voltages between 0 and 2 volts. So if you apply that to a pitch sequence, then it keeps it within 2 octaves of range and kind of makes the melody sound nicer, so it's not jumping around to extreme intervals. So why don't we take the output of, maybe we'll just use one channel to start with. So I'm going to take the output of the first channel, and let's plug that into the input of the barred quartet on the first channel. So this will sequence our melody. I'm going to just plug in the C minor scale as a good default. And then I want to turn on the shift register mode. So I think the way this works is I need to press edit, and I need to turn on the gate input, which means that it's going to be listening for a trigger or gate in on this jack in order to know when to advance. And then I think on the other channels, I have to go into the options menu and press the A sharp button. I think that turns on shift register mode for the other channels. Hopefully this works, because I've actually never tried this before. And maybe we can actually see this working if I just send that signal out to, let's see, I'm going to take 4 cables out of the 4 outputs, and I'm going to send them into the Mordax data, actually, which is our oscilloscope over here. I'm going to turn it on the voltage monitor mode. And I'm going to look at all 4 voltages at the same time and see how they relate to each other as I advance the gate input. Okay, so we need to send a gate and a voltage to the barred quartet. So I think I can do this with... The barred quartet has a T output next to its 4 CV outputs that'll send a trigger anytime the step advances. So I think I can send that into the gate input on the barred quartet, and that should trigger the shift register. So let me just try manually advancing the step, which you can do with the next button. And I'm just looking at... I don't think this is working. Is it sending a trigger? Let's see. Yeah, it sure is. don't know how well you can all see this, but let me go to the pod. So I'm on the first step of the Mimetic Digitalis sequence, and it's registering 0.26 volts, and the other three channels coming from channel 2, 3, and 4 of the barred quartet are all roughly 0. So I would expect that when I advance the sequence, it's changing the pitch of channel 1, and it's also sending that trigger to the barred quartet, which I thought was supposed to advance the shift register, but when I press next, I see the top voltage change to 0.43, but the bottom 3 are still 0. I would have expected the second channel to change to 0.26. So maybe I haven't configured this correctly. Maybe I should try this off stream before we get into it here. That's a shame. Oh, I wonder, maybe I need to program the same scale on every channel here. Maybe that matters. If anyone else has barred quartet and has tried this before, I'd be all ears about whether this worked for you. Let me check one more time that the gate input is definitely on. And if I go into the options for channel 2, oh. Not sure this is working. Well, it seems like it is. Yeah, it doesn't seem to work. So I'm going to need to experiment with this more to see why. But I'm not seeing the shift register mode working. It seems to reset when I go back into the settings here. That's a shame. I don't know why. Well, doing it live. Okay, well, let's turn the gate mode off then. And we'll just use 4 channels of quantization, of Mimetic Digitalis. So I'm going to unplug these. I'm going to take three more of these and just move them into the inputs. So that way we'll have 4 channels of pitch sequencing coming from Mimetic Digitalis, and they'll all have different CV values that will be quantized to the correct scale by a barred quartet. And we just need to decide what voices we want them to be. Let's tune Manus. I think I want that to be my first voice. So I'm going to send that into the tuner. And I am hearing nothing. Why is that? Oh, there we go. Let's set this to a C. Maybe this should be higher, like C5. So that way, if I go into the bass range, we're at C1. Okay, let's plug this into, I wonder if maybe we'll plug this into Yester Versio. We'll try that as our delay. So let me get, Manus is a voice with only a mono output, but Yester Versio has a stereo input. So this will stereoize our mono signal. Let me get kind of default settings here. Let's go into maybe the 4th channel of our mixer, or the 5th channel rather. I like to have 4 gaps in the mix. The first 4 channels dedicated to drums if I want to use drums later. So let's plug this into our audio interface. And if I unmute this, let's make sure we can hear it. Let me know in the chat if you can hear that sound and whether it's too loud or too quiet compared to my voice when I'm speaking. Okay, so we've got the audio path going. Now, what I'm thinking is I'd like to have a different trigger sequence than usually. I just send Mimetic Digitalis like a 16th note clock to advance the steps. But I'm thinking it might be interesting to use a different step sequencer. Like maybe I'll use the Steppy, which is this gate sequencer up at the top, which is usually used for drums because it does on-off sort of triggers or gates, but not pitches. So what I can do is we can clock this. Let me get a clock signal from Pamela's Pro Workout. I will give this 4x clock signal, which is 16th notes, into the clock input. And let's take Pamela's run output into the reset. So every time we start Pam, it will start at the beginning of the sequence on Steppy. And then I'm thinking on the first channel, which we are on, I'm just going to kind of program in a sort of a series of gates across this pattern. So this is 16 steps in 2 rows. So like 1 through 8, 9 through 16, and then it just repeats in a measure. And any light that is lit means it'll send out a trigger on that step as the clock advances. So if I then take a output of that channel that I just programmed, we can send that into the N input on Mimetic, and that will advance the step every time there's a clock pulse. So let's zoom in on the right case. And you should be able to see that the little LED on Steppy is advancing as the clock runs. And every time the step passes one of those green pulses, or one of the green lit LEDs, that's when it advances to the next step on Mimetic Digitalis. So that determines when the pitches will change. We're not hearing anything yet because I haven't patched the audio signal. But let's take that fourth output, or sorry, the output of that first quantizer channel, and we'll send that into the pitch input on Manasiterratas. So now we're sequencing pitches in the C minor scale from Mimetic, but we're advancing that only when there's a trigger here. Now what I thought would be interesting is to use a second channel on the second channel output B on Steppy to give it a different pattern for when to actually play notes. So if we send this to the trig input, let's see, is this cable long enough? Nope, need something a little longer. Manus has its own built-in VCA, so it has a trig input that tells it when to play. And if I just send it a trigger, and then we unmute, let's bring up the low-pass filter and increase the envelope. So it has this single control that controls the internal VCA envelope. So every time it receives a trigger, this determines how long it takes for that note to fade in and how long it lasts. You might want to go up an octave. Let's see. So you can kind of hear there's a little bit of like a glide there when the CV step changes because the note or the pitch value on Mimetic changed, but the trigger from the previous step on the second channel of Steppy, it's still holding the note from that, so you're actually hearing the note change without re-articulating the note. going to bring the low pass filter down. It's nice, Manus has a built-in low pass filter, so you can darken the sound without needing an external filter. And then let's bring in, actually I should get let me patch the clock into a multiple. So let's stop the clock for a second. I'm going to move this into my mult up here, and we're going to patch that 4x clock into my mult so that I can send the clock signal to different things. And let's send a copy of that to Yester Versio, our effect, because this is clockable. So if I start the sequence again, oh, sorry, I didn't have the camera on. What I did is I unplugged the 4x clock output that I had going directly into Steppy, and I patched it into a multiple so that I can make copies of the same signal. I took one copy into Steppy where it was before, and then I patched another one into the clock input on Yester Versio, or delay. So let's increase the dry wet so we start to hear the delayed sound. This is a 3-tap delay, so for every note it gets on the input, you should hear 3 repeating copies of it. And we have it clocked, so the time of the repeats is synced to the tempo. There is a time control knob, and that can be used to change the length of, or the delay, the time of the repeats in relative ratios to the incoming clock signal. So turning left and right should multiply and divide that signal to make them faster and slower. You can hear it's faster if I turn left. I'm going to try going a little slower. This top switch changes sort of like the base delay time. So I have it in the even position where the clock is just kind of exactly on the beat, but there's also a triplet multiplier. So if I move the switch into the middle, then you have kind of a 3 against 4 pattern. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If I slow down the clock division, it should be easier to hear that. And there's also a dotted value, which is like 1.5 times the beat length. That sounds nice. Okay, there's also the regen control, which is the feedback, which will send some of the output of the delay back into the input to increase the number of repeats that we hear. So if I start to turn that up, we should get longer tails of echoes. The pan control controls the stereo image of that. So if I turn this away from center, we should start to hear kind of like some variance between the left and the right channels in stereo, which definitely makes it sound nicer. Yeah, I like that. There's a tone control, which I think is kind of like DJ style. Turning to the left is a low pass filter, darkens the sound of the repeats, versus high pass to accentuate the highs. And then there's a chorus control, which I think has 2 functions also. Turning to the left gives you kind of like harmonies by pitch shifting the input. So if I turn all the way to the left, you get kind of like that octave up echo. And then if I turn to the right of noon on the chorus, I think you get more of a sort of standard chorus sound where it's just kind of like a thick, more warbly kind of effect. Anyone have any opinions about which of those two they like better? The chorus versus the harmony? I think I maybe will go with the chorus. It's a little subtler. And there's also a wave folder built in, so this will add distortion effectively to the delayed signal. Add a little bit of grunge. That sounds very cool to me. This is kind of a classic noise engineering thing. I think like almost all their modules have a wave folder. That's kind of their thing. So this can get very distorted if you turn it all the way up. And you can hear it also added like a sub to octave. There's like a lower sound in it now. At the top of that range. I wonder if maybe using a channel of Mimetic to modulate some of Yester Versio and Manus might be more interesting than using just multiple channels of pitch sequencing. I think I'm going to do that. So rather than patch all of these to the Bard Quartet, let's just use them one at a time as we decide what we want them to be used for. So let's take the second channel and I'm going to put it through Lapsus Os, which is a attenuator just to its left. And then the attenuated version of that, maybe we'll do, let's do the wavefolding actually. So there should be a fold input. Yeah, right here. And then if I increase this attenuator, I'm not seeing anything. Did I forget to plug this in? Oh no, it's there. So I'm letting the full signal through from Mimetic right now. And it's actually pretty subtle. You can hear a little bit of that kind of distorted echo coming in and out. I don't know how well you can see this on the camera, but the LED on that slider will light up different brightnesses based on the signal passing through. So maybe we want to make this a little stronger. I'm going to selecting the second channel here on Mimetic, and I'm going to shred this. If I press load and shred, there we go. So remember when I had set all the steps initially, let me turn that down a bit. I pressed load 0 and shred all the same time, which will randomize the values of the steps between 0 and 2 volts because it's kind of intended to be used as a pitch sequence. But if you don't press 0, if you just press load and shred, then it'll do the same thing, but it'll pick values between 0 and 5 volts, so you'll get a much larger range of voltage. And now that I've done that, on this second channel, you can hear that if I let the full signal through, then we have a lot of variation in the amount of wavefolding on that delay. I can pull that down a bit by just attenuating the signal with Lapsus Os, so maybe let's put it about halfway. Okay, so something I want to do to sort of vary the sequence here is, let me actually stop the clock so we're not listening to the same thing forever. So Mimetic Digitalis has a bunch of different ways to control the position of which step is being selected. So far, we've just been sending a trigger into the N input, which will advance to the next step, sort of from left to right, top to bottom, like you would read text in English. But there are also, you can also move horizontally, vertically, randomly, or reset to the origin point, like a go back to the first step. So you can do that with the buttons here. There's like a next button. You should be able to see that's what we've been doing so far, is just going to the next step in sequence. But I can also press X, which will cycle through horizontally, but without ever changing rows. And then the Y will change the column without changing the, or I guess it'll go vertically, so it'll change the row without changing the column. There's rand, which will jump to a random step whenever you press it or receive a trigger at the corresponding voltage. And then origin is the actual reset, which goes back to the first step. So we have two more gate sequences that we can program in on Steppy. And I think it would be interesting to use those with kind of more sparse patterns to send a trigger into the X and Y inputs, or maybe the R input, to sort of like skip to different locations within the sequence. So it's not always just moving sequentially through the 16 steps. So let's do that. Let me select the C channel, and I'm just going to put a step maybe on the 5th step, and then I'm also going to hold I'm going to hold the 7th step down, which changes the total number of steps before that channel cycles. You see how the 7th step is flashing? So every time this gets a clock pulse, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the 5th step, it's going to send a trigger, and it's going to have 6, 7, and then after the 7th step, it's going to reset back to 1. And this is per channel, so the other channels on Steppy are going to continue at whatever step length they've been set to when they loop. They don't affect each other in that way. So this allows us to have kind of like a polymetric relationship where the trigger sequencers are kind of looping at different points, creating a sequence that constantly shifts. So this may be too frequent, but let's just try it. I'm going to plug that C output into the X input of Mimetic. And if we hit play again to start this over, let me go down to the end. This doesn't really matter, but let's start there. Now, if we look at the LEDs on Mimetic, we should see that it's kind of like occasionally getting one extra movement horizontally. I think maybe moving vertically would be more obvious. Let me move that cable to the Y input instead of the X input, since we're already moving stepwise horizontally on new triggers. Now we should be able to see every 7 steps, or on the 5th step of every 7-step loop on that C channel, we're jumping down to the next row immediately without going through all the intermediate steps. And as a result, we'll get a pitch sequence that changes and is not the same on every loop of 4 beats, essentially. We can also reshred the first channel. So I'm going to go back to settings for the first channel only, and I'll do load 0 and shred again. And that will select a new set of 16 random voltages from 0 to 2 volts for this first channel, which we're using for our pitch. This will also change the melody. And if we go back to... I'm actually forgetting now what we use the first channel for. So the first channel is advancing N. The second channel is triggering Manus. That's right. So let's go back to the first channel and let's change the... remove some of these steps. So now it's changing pitches less often. And if we go to the second channel, we can change when a new note rings out. So varying any of these parameters will change our sequence. Let's get some more modulation going on Manus to vary the timbre of the voice more. So I'll send a few modulation signals from Oct, which is my usual modulation source for this stuff. That's this little thin module. Here are these two, is the Oct and its expander, which give you just a bunch of plug-and-play modulation signals. I'm going to use the bipolar triangle waves from the main Oct module, and I'm going to send them into the asset, which is an attenuator. Let's just do 4 of those into the first 4 channels. These LFOs are all offset from each other so that they don't repeat at exactly the same rate. They're not clock divisions of each other. And then let's plug these modulation signals into different parameters on Manus. So let's do the low pass filter. I'm I'm going to set the low-pass filter's offset right in the middle. And then the amount of signal that I let through on the attenuator will determine how much that low-pass filter changes. Okay, let's do the same idea. I'm just going to set all the attenuators at like kind of 50% of their total strength. So we're letting half of the voltage through. Let's do maybe smash. Let's turn that down a little bit so it's not so strong. And let's do deep, aka profundity. Maybe we'll use actually a unipolar one for this. I don't hear much difference there. Let's try the saw mod instead. I'm going to slow the clock rate down on aux so that these changes don't happen quite so quickly. Let's shred the voltages for the pitches again. Get a new melody. Maybe let's send the output of Yester Versio through Melotus Versio also and start getting some grains on this. We also have one more LFO that we can use here. Let's modulate something on Yester Versio, like maybe the tone. Okay, I'm going to mute this for a second, and I'm going to move the patch cables. So instead of going out of Yester Versio into the mixer, we're going to go out of Yester Versio into Melotus Versio. And then into the mixer. So let's turn that fully dry, bring our sound back in. Set all of the knobs to kind of a default position. Now this module I don't know super well. I've tried it a few times, but I don't, I'm not an expert by any means, so this will be highly exploratory. I may even need to look up what some of the controls do. But generally speaking, this is a granular processor, or it's a delay based on granular processing. So it takes it kind of listens to the incoming audio, and it chops up the incoming audio into little tiny short bits called grains, and then it plays back those bits at different rates, which in a sense is kind of what a delay does. But I think with granular processing, you're kind of, well, you're getting more granular, as the name implies. You're like the bits of audio that it samples are much smaller, and the way that it sort of stretches them and overlaps them is different. So let's bring in the blend and listen to what it sounds like just kind of in its default settings. It sounds very reverby to me by default. Now this does have a clock input. I think that's the flow jack. So maybe I'll take another copy of our clock and patch that to the flow input. It sounds pretty cool. Let's bring it fully like 50-50 dry wet. And let's try messing with the controls. So the mode switches, the top one does like reverse, question mark, or forward. And I believe that's like the direction of playback of the grains. So I have it in forward mode where the grains that it plays back are going to match the way that the input happened. Reverse will actually switch it, so it's playing them backwards. So that's actually nice. I like that. So we get kind of a swell in instead of that hard attack on the grains. And then the middle mode, I think, will randomly select between forward and backward on any given grain that triggers. But let's leave it on reverse. I think it actually sounded nice and smooth. The bottom switch has to do with the mode in terms of like how it's generating grains. The modes are clock, hold, and freeze. I believe clock is kind of like essentially syncing it more like a standard sync delay. So I think this is a good default. And then hold and freeze are related to just like listening to high gates on that input as to when it should kind of generate the next grain. Okay, then we have sparse. Interesting. So turning that fully clockwise kind of makes it all come in and out. Let's try turning it all the way counterclockwise. So I think this is kind of like how frequently a grain is triggered. So when we have it at the least sparse, I think it's kind of a little counterintuitive that it's named sparse. It's kind of more like density, where... yeah, I guess that makes sense. So it's the most dense at the minimum setting, where you're hearing lots and lots of grains played up back on top of each other, overlapping, and so you get this kind of constant, just like wash of sound that's more like a reverb. And then as I turn sparse up, it reduces how many grains are being played. That's actually really pretty. The delay, I think, is like how long it takes between the time that the original audio happens versus when you start to hear the grains. So I think if I turn delay really short, it may not be super audible with these settings, but we should start to hear the grains of incoming audio like right away. Whereas if I turn it all the way up, I don't know that this is that audible with this input. Maybe let's just leave it at half. And then cohere. I think this kind of reduces the randomness of the grain generation. So before, with the cohere all the way down, it's kind of just like this wash of grains being triggered at sort of clocked yet sort of random intervals. So you kind of constantly have grains going in and out. And then as you turn cohere up more... Oh, did we lose my video? Oh, great. Forgot to plug in my camera. We may be screwed today. This may be a very short stream because I have just realized that I did not plug in the AC adapter to my camera, and so it is out of battery. I really need a checklist for these streams so I don't make any technical mistakes. Alright. I think we're back, but... no, it's not going to turn on. Alright, sorry folks, we're going to have to cut it short on this one, but I hope at least the ideas that we talked about here with Mimetic and hearing some of these sounds from Yester and Melotus were inspiring you. Okay, sorry about the short stream. Technical difficulties, but that's the nature of doing it live. I should be back next week and we'll do some more of this. Thanks for those that watched.